Dear students, uh, the use of symbol in literature is quite old. Since ages and across ages and across literature, we have witnessed the use of symbols in literature. But as a student of English literature, as a student of literature, as a student of modernism and postmodernist discourses, you must be aware that in the 20th century, there emerged poetic drama. And in the 20th century itself, we also witness the emergence of expressionistic plays. I basically invite you, or rather suggest you, to read and study about expressionism and expressionistic plays separately. I also suggest you to read about the symbolist, imagist movement of 20th century. But here today, we have to restrict ourselves to a discussion of symbolism in Waiting for Godot. And dear students, as we all know, that poetic drama emerged, or rather re-emerged, as a very strong force in the 20th century. We also find expressionism as a very important movement during the 20th century literature. So we have a lot of expressionistic plays being written in the 20th century. And dear friends, with the emergence of poetic drama and the emergence of expressionistic plays, symbols came to be used very extensively in drama and in literature. Though symbols were used earlier also, I mean, Shakespeare, if you read Shakespeare, you will find that Shakespeare also uses a lot of symbols in his plays. When you look at other Elizabethan writers and dramatists specifically, you can find the use of symbolism there in their plays. But the emergence of symbolism in the 20th century and the emergence of imagism also in the 20th century, these two literary movements, my dear friends, symbolism and imagism, gave the dramatist an opportunity, gave the dramatist a very strong medium through which they can convey their ideas in a more emphatic and in a more subjective and in a more suggestive, rather, don't say subjective, in a more suggestive manner. So symbols and imagism and the imagist movement enabled the dramatists of the 20th century to convey their ideas in much more emphatic and suggestive manner. Dear students, the playwrights belonging to the theater of absurd also used symbols very elaborately and very artistically. These dramatists belonging to the theater of absurd, they had used symbols in a very artistic and in a very elaborate manner, we can say. They used fewest possible words. We know we have already discussed the use of silences and the use of minimal words in their dramas, right? So these theater of absurdists, these dramatists belonging to the theater of absurd, they used fewest possible words and they conveyed the inner reality of man with the help of symbols. Samuel Beckett, our dramatist, was also a great user of symbols in his creative writings, in his novels as well as in his plays. So he used symbols. I mean, Beckett used symbols very what you can say, extensively in his plays, in his works, in his novels also. There is a critic named Luc Estang, which is Luc. Luc Estang is Estang. So this Luc Estang had called him the creator of the myth of nothingness. So look here, Beckett being identified as the creator of the myth of nothingness. So dear friends, his symbols are very obsessive, and his symbols are very involuntary. So his symbols, the symbols that Beckett uses are not very voluntary kind of symbols. Rather, he uses very obsessive and very involuntary kind of symbols. At this juncture, I would like to refer to a novel by Samuel Beckett, a novel titled Molloy, Molloy. It's a very famous novel. It's a very famous work by Samuel Beckett. So this novel, Molloy, used symbols in a very naive manner, in a very naive fashion. An obscure and invisible hierarchy broods over the novel, beginning with the invisible chief named Yudi, Youdi, and ending in agents like Moran, on whom obscure and very destructive missions are imposed. In Molloy, there is a presence of a cruel god. There is a presence of a hidden god. Dear friends, this presence of the cruel god or the hidden god is not in Molloy only. This cruel and hidden god appears in some other works of Beckett also. For example, there is a very famous work by Beckett titled The Text of Nothingness, and another work titled Unnameable. Now, in these two works, we have very full of this cruel and hidden God, of the desolate, talking about the desolate conditions of man, groaning under the tyranny of this cruel hidden God of the Old Testament, Jehovah, Jehovah, as we know from earlier studies also, right? So, dear friends, Beckett has always been like a father to his characters. Look here, and with this, I actually begin the discussion of symbolism in the in waiting for Godot also. So Beckett has been a kind of a sort of a father to his characters. He treats them very cruelly. I mean, Beckett treats his character in a very cruel manner. He treats them in a very rough manner, like a father treats his son, maybe you can say, mutilating them, martyrizing them, killing them, and sometimes even eating his characters also. So hence his characters do not present themselves in a in a voluntary manner. As I said earlier, also that his characters are basically involuntary. You know, so his characters do not present themselves voluntarily. A whole, what we witness is that there is a whole phantasmagoria of creation, of destruction, rejection taking place in a Beckett play, a sort of a Blakean drama. Blakean coming from the very famous romantic poet Blake, you know? So a sort of a Blakean drama between the one who creates, I mean the creator, and the creatures that he brings into life. So painful beings they are, the characters of Beckett. They are always seeking to escape. The characters of Beckett, they appear as very painful beings, and they are always trying to escape. So uh, Beckett always clothes his characters like puppets. He animates his characters like puppets. and he adds a sort of a symbolism to them. So his characters, Beckett characters, are like puppets in the hands of Beckett, the creator. And like a father, he treats with them in a very cruel manner, mutilates them, as I said earlier, martyrizing them, as I said earlier, killing them, and sometimes even eating them. So he clothes them and animates them. I mean, his characters like puppets, and that is why he uses symbolism to a very great extent in his plays and in his other works also. And his symbolism, I mean Beckett's symbolism, my dear friends, is very harsh. It is very violent. It is very bitter, and yes, it is very original also. It is very original also, and it is highly personal also, we can say. So when you look at Waiting for Godot as a play, you will find that it's a very rich play as far as symbols are concerned. Waiting for Godot, with regard to the use of symbols, is a very rich play. Let us look at the character of Godot himself, that very strange, mysterious force that is present in the drama named Godot. And my dear friends, this Godot himself is a very symbolic presence. It is, the Godot itself is very highly symbolic. Now let us look very quickly as a symbol Godot what Godot represents. Friends, Godot may represent something godly or godlike, we can say. Godot represents the earthly ideal of a better social order. So Godot is a representative of an earthly ideal of a better social order, which we basically actually dream. It may also represent death, as we are saying time and again in our earlier discussions also. So Godot can be a symbol of death also. And we know that Godot can also be a symbol of silence. It represents silence also. So Godot may also, my dear friends, suggest the inaccessible self. It is also suggestive of the intervention of a supernatural agency. And you will also agree with me that it may also, I mean, the character of Godot, the presence of, sorry, this strange figure of Godot may also stand for a mythical human being whose arrival is expected to change the situation. You know, a mythical human being of whom the two tramps, Vladimir and Estragon, are waiting, and that is expected to change their situation. Now, my dear friends, let us move on to look at the symbolism that is involved in the characters of the two tramps with reference to Godot. For the two tramps, my dear friends, Godot represents peace. For Vladimir and Estragon, I mean to say, Godot is symbolic of, Godot is representative of peace, rest, respite from waiting, and that ordeal of waiting in which they are going through. So this appearance of Godot, this very coming of Godot, may represent a sort of a respite from waiting, right? A sense of reaching to the heavens is also represented for the two tramps. They are, I mean, Vladimir and Estragon are hopeful that if Godot appears, they might be saved from the evanescence and the instability of the illusion of time, and to find peace also, to find permanence also outside it. So dear friends, in that case, if Godot comes, if Godot appears, they will no longer remain tramps. They will no longer remain homeless wanderers, right? So Godot thus represents for them the objective of their waiting. Godot is the representative of their objective of waiting. Godot also, my dear friends, for Vladimir and Estragon symbolizes, salvation. And some critics also regard Godot as an empty promise in a meaningless life. An empty promise in a meaningless life. So this empty promise in a meaningless life has also been represented by the character of Godot, we can say. Now, with this, let us move on to what the character of Estragon and Vladimir symbolize, what they represent. Dear friends, the character of Estragon and Vladimir is also very deeply symbolic. They represent the ordeal of waiting. The ordeal of waiting that is experienced by us also, by one and all, by all of us. So they represent that ordeal of waiting which we also have felt at some point of time. The two tramps, that is Vladimir and Estragon, also suggest, and this is what we have already discussed earlier also, that the two tramps suggest ignorance. The character of two tramps also suggest impotence, human impotence, we can say. The two tramps also suggest helplessness. They also suggest boredom, ennui, etc., etc. So they do not have the essential knowledge. They means Vladimir and Estragon. And this is what we have discussed earlier also when we were discussing the themes. So these two, Vladimir and Estragon, they lack the essential knowledge. They do not know who Godot is and what Godot will do to them if he comes. What would happen if they stop waiting for Godot? So they are ignorant of all these aspects, and being ignorant, they are unable to act. So they are impotent also. Being ignorant, they are unable to act. Hence, they are helpless. They are impotent. So this impotency, this helplessness, this ignorance leads to the feeling of boredom. And this also leads to the feeling feeling the difficulty in passing their time. So in order to pass their time, we know the story that in order to pass their time, they resort to various processes of passing their time. They do certain exercises to pass their time. They do certain acts to pass their time. They resort to the use of certain devices to pass their time. But every attempt to pass their time is futile. Every attempt, every act to pass their time, every exercise that they adopt to pass their time fizzles out. All of us know all these aspects. So the whole experience of the two tramps has a lot of universal implications. We can see ourselves in the character and of the two tramps. We can see ourselves in their very act of waiting, in fact, right? So now with this, let us move on to look at the characters of Pozo and Lucky and the symbolism inherited in the characters of Pozo and Lucky. Dear friends, the characters of Pozo and Lucky represent master and a slave. So they represent a sort of a master and slave relationship. They also symbolize the relationship between capital and labor, right? They also symbolize a relationship between wealth on one hand an art on the other hand. You remember all that dance of Lucky, all that talents that Lucky possesses, as we are told in the play, right? So we know, we can understand the various kind of relationships that has been presented or represented through the character of Lucky and Pozo. And I repeat that they represent a relationship of a master and a slave. They represent a relationship of capital and labor. They represent a relationship of wealth and art. So, my dear friends, one critic is of the opinion that Pozo is none other than but Godot himself. So there is a critic who says that it was basically Godot did appear in the play, and it appeared in the play in the form of Pozo, right? And it was Stragon's and Vladimir's inability that they were unable to identify that Pozo was Godot. So this is one view of one critic. This is the opinion of one critic only. You may disagree with this also, that Pozo is none but Godot himself. There is yet another critic, my dear friend, who says that Pozo is the representative of the God, and he basically represents the two gods, the God of Old Testament and the God of the New Testament also, right? So Pozo is the God of the Old Testament, the tyrant divine God of Act 1, and the God of New Testament, injured God, helpless God, crucified God of Act 2. So look here, this is one opinion, this is one view. According to one critic, Godot is the representative of the two gods of the two testaments. In Act 1, he is the God of the Old Testament, that very tyrant God, right? And in Act 2, he is the injured, helpless, and crucified God, right? So of course, I know and I understand, you will also agree with me that this is just one view, this is just one interpretation of looking at the play. Friends, there is one very extreme view that regards Pozo as anti-God also, or anti-God also. One extreme view of which regards Pozo as an anti-Godot, whereas Lucky is seen as Godot. Lucky is seen as Godot. Lucky also suggests the biblical figure of Christ, the Messiah, helpless, crucified, right? So friends, these, we have discussed that there are different ways of interpreting waiting for Godot. So certainly when we talk about symbolism in the play, these can be certainly one or the other way of looking at the symbols in the play. So friends, some critics are also of the opinion that one can see autobiographical elements in the character of, or rather in the characters of Pozo and Lucky. Now, when you will study the life of Samuel Beckett, you will know that there was a time in his career, there was a time in his professional career when Beckett was highly influenced by the very famous novelist James Joyce, right? So critics can see some autobiographical elements in the characters of Pozo and Lucky. And as I said just now, that during the initial stages of his literary career, Beckett was highly influenced by James Joyce, almost like a disciple of James Joyce. So while, my dear friends, Pozo and Lucky may be body and intellect, look here, they are basically, they can be seen as two sides of the same persona, and maybe Beckett himself, because critics are able to see some autobiographical elements in the play. They also represent essentially the one way of getting through life, right? So So during the initial stages, as I was saying, as I said already, that Beckett was highly influenced by James Joyce. So they also represent essentially, I mean, Pozo and Lucky, they essentially represent uh, uh, body and intellect, master and slave, capitalist and the proletarian or the proletariat, right? Colonizer and the colonized, the sadist and the masochist. And they also represent Joyce and Beckett. Look here, they also represent Bozo and Lucky, also represent Joyce and Beckett. They also represent essentially the one way of getting through life, one way of getting through life, um, just as Estragon and Vladimir represent another way of doing so. So, friends, Pozo and Lucky may also be treated as representatives of the ordinary world, which the two tramps from which the two tramps are excluded. So look here, Puzo and Lucky can be seen as symbols of representing the ordinary life from which the two tramps, Vladimir and Estragon, are actually excluded. So Pozo and Lucky appear as the metaphor of society, not as it is, but as Estragon and Vladimir might see it. So they, I mean Pozo and Lucky, are the metaphors of the society, not the reality, not as it is, but as Estragon and Vladimir might see the society as it is. So it has also been said that Pozo and Lucky are one man. This is what I was trying to tell you earlier. So they can be seen as two sides, or the two coins, the two sides of one coin, the two sides of one man. They represent the duality of me and you. They represent the duality of body and mind. They also represent the relationship between the material and the spiritual side of man. They also represent the intellectual and the physical. I mean the spiritual, the intellectual, and this intellectual being subordinate to the appetites of the body, the physical appetites of the body. With this, my dear friends, let us move on to the end part of our discussion today. Let us try to see some other things apart from that. We have tried to look at Godot, the symbolism inherited in Godot. We have tried to look at Vladimir and Estragon and the symbolism inherited in their character. We have tried to look at Pozo and Lucky and the symbolism inherited in their character. Let us now move on to look at some other things in the play that can be termed as, that can be seen as symbolic. For example, my dear friends, the tree is very symbolic. The tree can also be seen as very symbolic. The identity of the tree, any tree, you know, when we see when we say a tree, so we can imagine a tree along with leaves. We cannot imagine a tree without leaves, right? So the very identity of a tree lies in its leaves, you know. But do you remember? Yes, you do. That the leaf in Waiting for Godot, more specifically, the leaf in the first act is without any leaf. So, my dear friends, the tree in Waiting for Godot is symbolic of failure. The tree in Waiting for Godot is a failure. Estragon or Estragon's question introduces yet another vain attempt at suicide, a gesture which the tree inspires time and again. Suicide as a gesture which the tree inspires recurrently. So its significance cannot be redeemed through botanical classification. The significance of the tree cannot be redeemed through botanical classification. So therefore, Vladimir gives it a name that designates a tree as merely a necessary part of the landscape. So he calls it a willow. He calls it a willow. And you know, I must have told this in your class that a willow is a tree that weeps. It is said, and a weeping willow is a term that we use time and again. So Vladimir very deliberately gives this name, gives this identity to the tree that is present in Waiting for Godot. He calls it a willow, means a tree that weeps, right? So friends, there are yet another symbols in the play. The four clowns. The four clowns. Now, this is for the first time that even I am saying, and I am looking at Pozo and Lucky also as clown. So the four clowns on their stage is Stragon, Vladimir, Pozo, Lucky, right? So the four clowns on their stage have difficulty to maintain themselves on their feet. You know, can you remember that very scene in which they are unable to stand on their feet, and one after another they drop down? Can you remember that happens in Act 2, right? So these four clowns on the stage have difficulty to maintain themselves on their feet. So, but when they try to grab each other, they try to take the support of each other. Look here what happens. Very tragic thing. A very tragic thing happens when they are unable to hold themselves, when they are unable to maintain themselves on their own feet in Act 2, and when they try to grab each other for their support, for each other's support, the human prop fails them. And look here, this body of Yahya Ibrahim is nothing but a mere prop. And this body, which is a mere prop, will one day fail me, right? So when they try to take the support of each other, this human prop fails them and they fall down on the ground. So this is also very symbolic, that there is a time, and there will be a time, when even this human prop will fail you, right? So let us now move ahead. Even the shoe. Can you remember that shoe episode in the play? Estragon trying to get rid of the shoes in the very first part, in the very first few pages, and the shoe reappears time and again in the play. So the shoes are also, my dear friend, symbolic of the essential instability of human construct. And this shoe is also symbolic of the essential instability of the human construct. Look here. The verticality of the cathedrals once symbolized man's aspiration. You know the cathedrals, you might have seen it, right? So the verticality of our cathedrals once symbolized our aspirations. In this drama of waiting for an absent God, man collapses. The cathedral collapses. So in this drama of waiting for an absent God, man collapses and falls in with the circular motive of frustration. Man falls down and falls. Can you remember those four fallen down, right? So with a circular motive of frustration. So thus, my dear friend, to conclude, we can say that the play is very highly symbolic, right? And you as a student should try to look at these symbols and some more symbols also in the play with much greater details. Friends, the title of the play is symbolic. Friends, the characters of the play are symbolic. the setting, the locale, the location, the minimalist stage, right? So the setting is also very symbolic, right? And you know, we have discussed it time and again that Beckett has used even words also as symbols. Words also as symbols. So, friends, it is basically the beauty of this play. It is the beauty of Waiting for Godot that Beckett has reduced the use of words and has conveyed a great deal of meaning through symbols, right? So with this, we come to an end of this discussion on the symbols of Waiting for Godot, right? And hopefully I have tried to list almost all the major symbols, but still I invite you to look into much more symbolism, to read much more symbolism that is there inherent in the play, right? So with this, I stop my discussion today, and I'll be informing you about my next lecture through your WhatsApp messenger, right? Thank you very much for today.